in a few stragglers. So I'll look after the lobby, and then I think Stefan, I'll hand over to you first as the chair of the panel, and then yeah, I mean maybe you can introduce yourself for people that don't know who you are, Stefan. I know you were very excellent last week, but obviously oh, here we go, Bobby's on. Bring Bobby in. And then maybe Simon can say a few words, Bobby can say a few words, and then get into it. I guess that's the general theme. So, okay. So, morning, Bobby.
Morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, we can't see you, but we can hear you. So,
I can see you.
Can you? Oh, I can't. That's interesting.
I can now. There was a delay, but I can now.
Yeah. Okay. There we
go.
go.
See me in there. It just takes a while for Teams to load in.
I've got a vision of what you look like, Bobby. So that I'll stick with the vision. So that's fine. Right. Okay. So we're now recording, and I will start admitting people in, and then I'll pass over to you, Stefan, very shortly. So give me 30 seconds.
Oh, you do the intro, so to say.
I'll do the intro. Yeah.
Background and all that.
Yeah. I'll do that. Yeah. Good morning, John. Good morning, Simon. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Billy. Good morning, Adrian. If you have just joined, if you could very kindly go on mute just to cut down any background noise, that would be good. That'd be great. Welcome. Got more people joining. Good morning, Barry. Good morning, Neil. Good morning, Peter. More people joining. I will control the lobby. We'll give it another minute, I think, Stefan, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Bobby's on now, which is good. John, I'm going to mute John. Thanks for muting John. Neil, if you could mute, that would be great. Just to cut out any background noise. Morning, Andre. Morning, Paul. If you could mute, please, if you just joined, that would be excellent. Thanks, Andre. And that's so Stefan that's fine. Excellent. Okay, good. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Coffee Morning on Pension Playpen. Delighted to have an excellent take up, bearing in mind it's mid-August and that we should all be on the beach sunning ourselves. This week's topic is about default and at retirement options, decumulation options. Stefan did an excellent session, as some of you will remember, last week on turning pots into pensions. And I think this week is very much a follow on from that theme. And Stefan has very kindly agreed to host a panel chaired by him and with Bobby Ridaway and Simon Eagle from Willis Towers Watson. So I think the important thing today is we want to debate. We want you to put things in the chat. As usual on Playpen, if you want to make a statement, challenge us, challenge Stefan, challenge crazy things that Simon say, then please raise a hand and Stefan will bring you in. So without any further ado, I'll pass you on to Stefan, and I want a thumbs up from everybody that we are now recording. So everybody happy that we're recording? Cheers, Billy. Thank you very much. Thanks, Phil. And thanks, Mike. That's good. Okay, so without any further ado, Stefan, I'll transfer over to you and I'll pass the baton, as they say.
Thank you, Steve. For you who don't know me, my name is Stefan Lundberg. I work for Cardano and Now Pensions here in the UK and also in Netherlands. I've done some work up in Sweden when it comes to improving the Swedish pension system. And I run a small podcast, which I encourage you to come and visit, called Pioneering Pension, or it's a webinar where I interview interesting people. So that's basically my background. And let's go around the panel and people introduce themselves. So over to you, Simon.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Simon Eagle. I'm a pensions actuary based in the UK, working in the past mainly in DB, but for the last 6 years I've been working collective DC, and with a particular focus in the last year on collective DC in decumulation.
And Bobby?
I'm Bobby Ridaway. I'm a professional trustee at Capital Cranfield. Have been since the start of the year. My main job for the last 25 years was an investment consultant, but what's become very topical and very interesting now is I've got a very keen interest in CDC, because the first 6 years of my career I was a with-profit actuary, and there's a lot of similar things between the two. And I actually did practical smoothing of investment returns over different cohorts. So I've got, so it's CDCs right into my sweet spot.
Thank you, Bobby and Simon. And Henry Tapper gave us the Shakespearean title, default drawdown or not default drawdown? That is the question. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. But before, I just want to sort of frame it and frame the discussion so we get off in the right place. For the savings phase, when the auto enrollment, the key wasn't overcoming inertia. The key of the success was that everybody could agree on what was a good default. Because I'm going to sound a bit judgmental, but everybody who is young are the same from a pension perspective, right? They're an unwritten book. We don't know what they're going to end up. We don't know what career they're going to have. We don't know when they want to retire. So we basically know very little about them. So the only universal advice we can give is contribute as much as you can and take investment risk to earn a compounding return. And that's sort of the eighth miracle of the world, as Einstein said. But this thing was good because it doesn't matter how much, how many different pots you have, because everybody do more or less the same. When you're young, you take a lot of investment risk. And also the people are a bit sort of unengaged in pension when you're young. Well, that's understandable. I'm going to do it, but not now. So being out on roll kind of works well. But the reason why it works well that everybody from politicians, from pension expert, everybody agree on what was a good default, more or less. Then you can tweak it a bit when you implement it. So I think that makes the default a very, very strong mechanism. When we're looking now in the spending phase, basically getting close to retirement, we are quite different. You know, when you're kind of 65 something, your whole life is kind of, it's not over, but it played out. You know if you have a family or not, you know where you roughly live, you know what your interests are, you know what your career is, you know what kind of savings you have. So it's much more sort of predictable, or at least you can say, this is what I want to do when I retire. And therefore, it's very difficult, I think, to find one size fits all. You have to think about everybody are a bit different. And also, if you come from the same background, think about your classmates from secondary school. Most of us are a bit old enough to kind of remember that in the far distance. Many of them ended up in very different positions. All you had more or less the same starting point. So that makes it a bit more challenging. And also, when you're a bit older and close to retirement, you're going to have a lot of pots with many different providers. And it might not be optimal for each provider to say, this is going to be, you know, the solution for you. You might should look at it more aggregated. And also the final comment I want to make is that members, when they're getting close to retirement, it's their money and they probably want it. So they probably are more willing to engage with us when than compared when they're younger. I had to renew my passport. I had to go through all the loops and hoops they want me to, and I will do it because I want my passport. I think it's the same when you're thinking of members. They want their money one way or another. So it's good to have a look at that. So the questions we will cover today is not so much on the solutions, because Einstein, he said, if I have 1 hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes on defining the problem and then 5 minutes on routinely solving it. And I would say we have enough solutions available. We can do great solutions. The question is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So one question, one area we're going to cover is a bit like, what do we do for a member who doesn't respond to any of our communication? Sort of, do we need a default for them? The second question or topic is a bit like someone who communicate with us, react on our communication. We're in conversation with him. Do we think of sort of the choice architecture with a sort of guided solution as the default? Or is it more like a guided solution we were trying to do to help them get in the right place? And also then when we do have communicating with members, are we communicating in the right way? Can we make things understandable? I think that is probably our biggest challenge as an industry, because I think members are clever enough to make decisions. They made it all the way to retirement. They had a family, they had a job, they had a career. Sure, they must be able to sort of think a bit about this as well, if we frame it correctly to them. And then the final topic is a bit on the legal side. Should there be a set of, you know, safe havens in terms of solutions that trustees can pick, a bit America inspired, or should you think Master Trust should offer advice? So these are sort of the areas we will cover. If you have a question around it, don't hesitate to put it in the chat and we will bring it in. But before we start, I want Bobby and Simon, I want to ask you a couple of questions to warm you up, to get you sort of, these are really good questions. So you cannot say on the one hand or the other hand. You cannot be an economist here. You have to say one choice or the other. So the first one, Barbie or Oppenheimer?
Not seen either.
Bobby?
I've not seen either of them.
If you have to pick one, which one do you pick? You have to make a choice. That's the whole point here.
Oppenheimer.
Okay, Simon?
I'm the same. I'd rather see Oppenheimer.
I seen Barbie, but I vote for Barbie. The second question, now we're going into more serious topics. What's most important? An affordable pension, meaning you take investment risk and sort of have the risk that you won't get the stability you're looking for. So affordability versus stability. Where would you pick in a drawdown or a post-retirement solution? What do you think is most important? Simon, I'll start with you this time.
Well, I say it depends on the individual, but are you asking, so if I was at retirement, what would I pick?
Or what would you recommend? Or what is more important to you, affordability or stability? If I reframe it that way, then. Yeah,
I mean, it depends on, I guess, how tight my finances are at retirement. But if I had a good level of savings, maybe I'd go for stability. If things are a bit tight, maybe I'll go for affordability.
Okay, that was an economist answer, but Bobby.
Yeah, I've got some other points on affordability, but to answer your question, I think stability subject to it being affordable if inflation takes off.
Okay, I will confess as well, I would probably go for affordability, in the sense it's going to be a long time before I die, so I'm actually willing to take some investment risk in the process, knowing that it can go wrong, and then of course I have to live with the consequences. The third question, before we jump into the real one, more like testing you, and I will pick you first now, Bobby. What is most important when you would design a solution? Is it to sort of that the member can get the mortality gains, so pooling longevity, or the adaptability in case the member situation change and they want to sort of do something different? So is it, what would you prefer as a sort of really important piece when you design something?
For the vast majority of people in the UK, I think it'd be the pooling. It's not just longevity, it's the investment as well.
Well, I think investment you can fix anyway, but longevity pooling, I think that is the core of insurance, and I think you need a lot of money in order to do that, to get the maximum value out of it. Simon, what's your preference?
I agree with Bobby. I think the most important thing is pooling longevity, because I see that as the main purpose of retirement savings, to get an income for life.
So now I will do my economist answer and say, if you do have little money, I will probably go for adaptability. And if I have a lot of money, as Simon said, it's probably more important to have stability. The main reason for that is if you have little money, the state pension is actually a big chunk of your income. And when you have more savings, it's going to be a smaller part of your income, and therefore you're going to need more stability. So that's sort of where we stand. So actually the panel is quite undiverse in terms of Bobby and Simon, because they think roughly the same thing. So hopefully they will think differently on the big questions here. So now the big question we want to drill down into, we now have members who doesn't respond to any communication. So this is basically, the default member in the savings space. They don't respond to emails. We're trying to reach out. We have these sort of wake-up packages, all of that. They don't get back to us. What shall we do when designing a product for them? And the question is, do we need a default for them? Who want to start?
I'll start because I think we need to go back a step. So I think the assumption that members going to have one decision point is a bit spurious, because firstly, if we're talking about DC savings, it's going to be a long time before, for the vast majority of you to enroll, the DC pot is going to be their main source of income. It's going to be subsidised by state benefits and more increasingly by work. So I think increasingly people will work in what's called the retirement phase, and what we need is a series of decision points at which they can get access to their money alongside their potential wage in maybe in a different career and their state benefits. So I think the decision point for members should be actually over time, and if we can't get them to engage over time, then we've got a really big problem. So I think some sort of default solution that allows the money to basically, there doesn't have to be a point, unless you've got loads of money and you're able to retire on your pension, on your funds. Why would you ever need that point in which you say, right, I need to decide to do this with my pot of money?
Thank you, Bobby.
You'd be invested in a default fund. You might want to decide you want some money, some income, but I don't think they should actually necessarily, for the vast majority of people in the UK who auto-enrolled, I don't think that's to necessarily be a decision point at which they decide to do something with their money. At the moment, in the UK legislative environment, they're forced to. We go from investment products to life insurance products. I think we get over that. We can allow investment to be invested all the way through. The only way that's really been allowed to happen so far has been defined benefit schemes, where defined benefit trustees have then paid the pensions, or defined contribution schemes where they've actually paid the pensions as well in trust-based schemes. So I think we need that. I think the actual at retirement, if a member doesn't respond, I think the question is, how do we actually engage with the member so they have more than just an at retirement decision to make? Maybe at late 40s, we start telling them at 55, at 57, you're going to have access to your pension pot. Let's start thinking about that now. Let's think about what sort of income you're going to want from it. Are you going to want to leave that invested? Are you going to be happy with things like pooling your longevity? Are you going to be happy that if you live for a long time, your pension will sustain and you'll have income? Whereas if you die early, that money will go into the pot for other people who live a long time. Are you willing to have that pool? So I think it's a bigger decision point than just will the member not respond at retirement age.
Bobby, if I'm going to interpret what you're saying basically there shouldn't be a default. You need to engage with a member and figure out what they want and then help them get there.
Now, there should be a default, and you engage with the member to let them understand what their retirement income options will look like, and the default will allow them some options, but not the full flexibility. So the default should allow them to take a certain level of income. You shouldn't just say this is what you're going to get each year. So a little bit of a flexibility there. But I think expect the members to. I see what you mean about members take other decisions in life, but I've got real life experience in my family, and even in financially literate people within my family, when they come to their pension pot, when these are older people in my family who have actually had the pension pots, they haven't got a clue when the pension information comes out. They've never looked at pensions ever. They don't understand the language. They don't understand the projections. They don't understand things like compound interest. It's really difficult to get members to get educated on pensions at a pension point. So I think the options they should have are more simple, basic options like, would you like a higher level of income or a slightly lower level of income? And these are the two options. This higher level of income, it will probably go down in time because you're taking higher initial income, but there won't be enough money to fund that higher sustained. Whereas a lower level of income, we can keep that relatively stable, and we can pay that till you die if you're happy to have the pool.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. And Simon, what's your take on this question? Do we need a default or not?
It's a really difficult one, because I guess you have to get behind kind of why is the member not responding when you've tried to engage, you've given the member opportunity, why are they not responding? And it could be two reasons. One of them might be that they're just not interested. Maybe they're still working. They don't need retirement savings. They're not talking to their retirement provider, in which case applying a default would be the wrong thing for them. They don't want to start taking their savings. Or it might be that they just find it all too hard and they're procrastinating. So even despite your efforts to engage and the guidance you're providing, you still get nothing back from them. I think my preference is maybe assume the former, assume that they're not engaging because they're not interested. I mean, if they really need the income, surely they would start talking to the provider that has their retirement savings. So if I had to kind of land on one side of the fence, I'd say maybe don't have a default at the point of retirement. But I agree it's a tricky one.
So in that sense, if you're in a DC savings phase and you're sort of ending in the landing portfolio at your retirement age, and you're just going to linger along in that portfolio until you come back and make a decision. Of course, then it's important that sort of landing portfolio do take some investment risk. Otherwise, you might end up not getting such a great pension in the longer term. Bobby, I would sort of...
And it itself could be a default. So a default could be you don't want access to your pension yet, or you do want access to your pension. If you do want access, we will default it unless you actually want to take some income. So we'll keep your money invested unless you want to take some income. That could be the default.
If you would say that, to me, that is a sort of good default because it keeps doors open for the member. We don't know why they're doing it. And if they don't need the money, there's no harm, at least as you take some investment risk to protect them from inflation. My question, probably, my second question, you probably addressed that already, but assuming that a member react on the communication, so we do have a dialogue with them, and they enter into our choice architecture, the way we have designed it within the scheme, whatever you want to design it. And I think what you call default there would be sort of the main track in that choice architecture. So, you know, if you click your way through, that's the path you would go along. And of course, you can go off another direction if you're interested. So let's dig a bit down into that. And Simon, if you would say you're talking to someone, what would be your sort of preferred main track for someone you're going to advise them into something, or sort of guide them into something, to use the right word. What would you guide them into?
Well, I think in the guidance you have to ask them some basic questions, and you'd guide them into something depending on the answers to the question. So you wouldn't necessarily have to go into the products themselves, but you could ask things like, are you in fairly good health? So you don't know how long you're going to live. Do you generally favour controlling things yourself and flexibility, or would you rather someone else manages investments for you? Do you tend to favour having certainty, so you kind of pay extra for a guarantee, or do you tend to prefer to seek higher income but take risk? And based on the answers to those questions, you could guide that. You could say, from what you say, that's consistent with this product, but consider this very carefully. Here's kind of a table comparing all the products, pros and cons. But you could guide in that kind of way. And I think based on, I mean, as I said at the start, I think that the main purpose of retirement savings is to provide an income for life. So I think you'd expect you'd be guiding a lot of people to that. So the ones that want guarantees, it's annuity, and the ones that want to aim for a higher income, it's collective DC, I would say. And of course, we've had in the UK, we had a default up till 2015. We had annuities as default, but they were kind of seen as expensive. So that was removed as a default. So it'd be strange if we kind of go full circle and we end up guiding most people back into annuities.
And you could say you basically argue for a sort of a track, and at some point you have decision gauge where you're saying, well, now it's up to you, dear member, to actually click what you want. And the other alternative would be to say, you just click yes, 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 and now I have a product. A bit like you you do when you enter into a website and you approve the cookies, right? Approve all, or you go and do a bit of customization. I see Gareth has a question. I will bring you in, but I just want to hear, Bobby, what's your thoughts about this? Because you started to talk about it in your previous comment.
Yeah, and I think I said this last week as well. I don't think default is going to be. I'm thinking default here for the people who don't have enough money, don't have enough time, probably going to still working. There's still going to be a significant number of people in the UK that have enough time, have enough money, and who want to consider options. So what my preface is, for me, the default is, let's see what the basic solution for those people who we can't engage with and who will probably still have other income. That's what I'm calling the default. Once we've got that sorted, if we haven't, we don't know what that would look like just now. It may be CBC, it may be something else. Then the people that have got the money, they already have financial advisors available. They're not out on a limb. They can look at drawdown. They can look at other options. It's this vast majority of people that haven't got the access to that and generally don't take financial advice and won't have adequate pots that need some solution, which is what I'm calling default. I'm not saying default is the solution for most people. We still will need options, and the default option might be one of the options for the people with enough money. So I say start with the basic building block of what would be a reasonable approach for people to leave their money invested if they didn't need to take any income, and then you can work on top of that then for the various levels of engagement and various levels of affordability.
Thank you, Bobby. Gareth, you have a question. You put up your hand, so.
Yeah, apologies, I came in late, so I don't know whether I've missed anybody talking about this before. But in a sense, kind of following up on what Bobby was saying about particularly the huge number of people that don't have enough money, if you like, saved, but also don't have enough money from other resources as well, in particular people who are going to be either already getting benefits or are likely to be entitled to benefits after they've reached retirement age, the means tested benefits. If you start thinking about putting people into default income generating schemes, you go back to what was happening pre-2016 and the freedoms, where huge numbers of people were getting compulsory annuities, but seeing absolutely no benefit from those in terms of increased income, because all that it did was to take a penny for penny away from their means tested benefits entitlements. Now we've got, I keep trying to find out what the actual average level of pension, DC pension savings is, and I can never find anything where people agree on it. Hugely variable, averages being quoted all over the place. But if you've got people on very small amounts that would generate very small amounts of income, they're likely to gain nothing if they're defaulted into an income scheme, where if they were in some kind of a drawdown scheme, it's very, very easy to draw down at a rate that doesn't affect the benefits. So if you're going to be talking about doing anything, that requires some kind of communication with members, then you've got to be sure that that communication includes taking those kind of people into account.
Thank you, Gareth, for your comment. Simon and Bobby, a quick reaction to that, and I will give my reaction.
That's the sort of members I'm thinking of, and I'm not saying a default income scheme. I'm saying, what would you default for vast majority of members who probably don't want to get access to this money straight away, or they want it to tie in with their state benefits? And for those people, you can have conversations with them. You should be having conversations with them 10, 15 years out. It should be part of the master, if it's a master trust or if it's an occupational scheme, it should be part of the education with members to really let them know where they're going to be going and what sort of option they're going to have, and to really start thinking about this. And I just think that those sorts of members are going to be the members that are probably going to be doing part-time work as well. And that is going to be so many of the DC pots that are going to come to retirement are not going to be adequate for a number of years yet. These are not going to be members' main source of income, main source of retirement income.
Simon?
Yeah, I agree with Gareth's point. If you're going to guide individuals to a certain solution, you have to understand things like, well, the size of their pot, but also you have to understand, is it their main source of retirement income, or do they have lots of other sources too? And that's a key factor to take into account when guiding them.
Gareth, I remember this discussion from both Denmark and Sweden as well, because you get an implicit marginal tax if you do it that way. So people feel, why did I save in the first place? And actually the Swedish government recommend people who have very small pots to take out as soon as possible so they can maximize their benefits. I think for me, if you have very little money, I would think of pension as you have a lot of state pension. Your income going to be mainly the state pension. And then your workplace pension is a bit of a top up on it. And therefore, I think for smaller pots, now how we define small, aggregated pot, it's actually a good idea to sort of go for a drawdown and take the money when you need it, probably when you're earlier retiree, and then live out the state pension later on. I think this is a very difficult discussion to have, particularly with politicians, because hey, we made a policy, everything is fine, yeah, but auto enrollment's been alive for 10 years. Another 30 years in its balance, right? So it's a very long discussion to have, but everybody thinks about you do have a decent sized pot and you want to solve it. But I think for the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be a lot of people with very small pots. And the question is, how do you get the best out of it for them? And maybe it's actually to do a drawdown so you can say, how do I want to spend my money? Is it over the next 5 years or the next 15 years, depending on how much you have? And just ignore the longevity pooling, because it's not enough money to actually get a meaningful income over a 20-year period. And then, of course, if you can do it for 20 years, then it kind of makes sense to pool longevity, right? Because then you have sort of reached the average life expectancy. That would be my take on it. We have a question from Billy Burrows as well.
Right, hello. Sorry, I wasn't able to attend last week. As someone who's been at the sort of the sharp end of this for a long time, we're looking at it from the wrong direction. It's all well and good, offering people options and defaults, but in my experience, there are three key questions that the member, the individual, has to ask themselves or discuss. And the first question, this really leads on from what Gareth was saying, is when is the right time to access your pension benefit? And it doesn't matter whether you've got a small amount, a middle amount, or a lot. Actually, one of the hardest decisions for people is when they access their pension, and that brings up a lot of issues. Tax, what's the point of taking taxable income if you don't need it, and so forth. The second question really is around what type of income you want, and then the third question is all about risk. So I guess what I'm saying is that before you present people with options or defaults, you do have to get them to engage with this and to think about those three key questions, because if they can answer those three questions with a bit of clarity, it actually then makes it much easier for them to end up with the best outcome.
Thanks, Bill. I think that's a very good observation, and it kind of linger into the third question we had, basically. How do you communicate with members? How do you sort of get them on board to actually understand what the choices they are, and how do you sort of make it accessible to them? The interesting part, as you say, one of my colleagues, David Bird, he used to work at LifeSite, and he said they observed that the people who actually went in for advice, it wasn't like the one with the largest pot went to advice. A lot of them decided to do it themselves as well. So it was quite intriguing there how I say it's a lot about the individual, what they want rather than anything else. But how do we build a good sort of how do we communicate with members so they understand what they're going to get? Because if you can't communicate, if you can't provide feedback, it's very difficult for members to say A is better than B, right? So I think I would be interesting to hear, to follow up on Billy's question from both Bobby and Simon. What do you think is a good way of sort of helping people make this choice and actually getting through with it? And we don't want to put members through choice overload either way. You don't want to, like if you go to an advisor, you have to fill in 12, 20 questions that you don't know the answer to, and you give up half the way, right, if this electronic form. So how do you sort of get them to come to the point where they actually think, oh, I understand it, I can make an informed decision, I understand the consequences. What do we need to do?
So I kind of touched on it earlier. You could start off asking fairly basic questions. I guess, and someone put in the chat that problem with that is even the basic questions, they might need guidance on how do they form their opinion on those. So like if you're asking someone, do you prefer to have a guarantee or aim for something higher but take some risk? Some people might not know might not know what their preference is. So I guess you have to kind of draw out what those two things might look like, maybe without making it too complicated, show them a scenario. So in this situation, if you had an annuity, it just stays the same. If you had collective DC, it would increase further or it would reduce, and then people would start to get a feel for what we mean by taking risk. It's a very difficult one though, because I think people expect to get help on this online, and certainly not everyone would want to pay for an IFA to help them through this. But having said that, it's a one-off decision, isn't it? It's such a key decision in your life, and it has to be done well. So it's a very difficult one. I think as an industry we need to continue working at this and kind of improve in this area.
The other aspect is, how do you communicate them? So how do you physically communicate with them? So I think we need to be cognizant of the cohorts that we're dealing with at the time. I think that gets harder as you go into the Masters Trust, because it's easier when you know your workforce, you know the company that you're working in. But when you go into Masters Trust, there's going to be more companies, and there still will be. I think there's pretty good evidence to show that generations have different levels of interest in different types of communications, and so you probably can work on some generic information there, but there's no substitute for knowing your actual workforce. And for some companies, some cohorts, it might be regular update pension teams meetings, or it might be coffee mornings in the office, in the cafe. It really does depend on who you're talking to. I think the message you're going to ask them, the questions, is really important, but the actual physical way, whether it's email or letter or face-to-face, is very important. More, it's face-to-face, and face-to-face doesn't mean physically in the same room. But I think you have to do this regularly and well out from retirement, get people interested in their pension a number of years out from retirement, because it's important that they do consider they'll have other choices to make on their finances. And even if they have only got a low amount coming from their pension, they potentially can make changes in their other parts of their finances. They might be able to pay their mortgage off slightly earlier. They might be able to do something else with other investment. They might be able to think, oh, actually, I'm not going to quite have enough money. I'll do a bit more part-time work in this area now, so I don't have to do it when I get to 65. So I think it's a general education piece over a period of time, but you need to look at the actual cohort you're dealing with to decide how to physically communicate with them.
I spoke to a friend who's working for one of the insurance companies up in Sweden, and they are basically implementing collective agreements, and there the unions play an important role. So the union representative, they do have a pension expert that you can go to, and it's kind of broader than just one company. So that's how they sort of created this sort of impartial guidance of someone who people kind of trust. So I think that was an intriguing experience. Another one which I've seen, which I liked, was actually when you illustrate what you're going to get as cash flows. So sometimes you might have, if you do have a part of a DB, perhaps from an older employer, then you have a bit of DC on top of it, to actually see the cash flow, which means for the next couple of years, but also into the future, because we tend to just look at the period when you retire, not what can happen when you're 85, 90, and so forth. So I think there is also an idea to sort of illustrate it. And to do that, you're going to need all the information from all the parts, otherwise it will be difficult, and all kind of contracts you happen to be in. And there, I think, making that accessible and understandable is an important part, particularly for this pension dashboard, but also that pension funds and master trusts can use it in their planning. Of course, there are going to be a lot of providers who will try to sell their products in this area and so forth. But I think visualizing in terms of cash flow what you're going to get, and that can actually be quite a good thing. A lot of this is probably doable if you have some sort of technology, because tax rules are sort of giving rules, and what you're going to get from the government in means tested benefits is also kind of programmable, so you can see what it means for an individual. So I think the challenge we have when we communicate is a bit like we're very generic. For an average person, this is what's going to happen, but I want to what's happening to me. I want to know what is for me in it for me, and there I think probably a lot can be done in improving it.
I think the government can have a big hand here, because they're going to be communicating the pensions dashboard, and that's a unique opportunity to really keep a serious. Why shouldn't the government regularly communicate about pensions? We regularly remind people about various other things, the 111 line, the NHS, the fact that they shouldn't drink and drive years ago. All these campaigns the government can do, and relatively cheaply. The government could do an ongoing campaign just for people to keep checking their pensions and look at their pensions options, and that they could build on anything they do in the dashboard. My concern is the dashboard might be left to firms to communicate, but if we can get the government to communicate something really good on dashboard, we could get them on side to give regular, basically pension awareness into the population. The government's the best placed really to do pensions awareness, because they can stick it on the side of the buses, they can stick it on the tube, they can put it on the TV, they can put it on the radio.
Yeah. Simon, any thoughts?
Sorry, Stefan, I forgot the question now. After I concentrate on what Bobby was saying, would you mind?
Can I chip in and just follow up a little bit on what you were saying, Stefan, as well?
Sure.
My background for decades has been around advice processes and technologies, not financial advice at all, no interest in products, but generic kind of advice. And two problems people always face when they are giving or receiving advice. The first one is that people tend to be looking at a situation or a problem, and everything is focused around that snapshot of their current situation. There tends not to be, in kind of what I call the advice industry, sort of CABs and so forth, any ongoing relationship with people. You are dealing with something that is as of today, and that's all that you're interested in, and that causes huge problems, because people don't tend then to look ahead, even a week, let alone 15 years. And for things around benefits, for example, today's benefits may be very different from next month's benefits, where things like retirement age kick in. And the other thing which is vitally important when you're talking to people about the options is being able to do those what if assessments. So this is where we are, this is where we think you're going to be, but what if you fall ill, what if you split up, what if the kids leave home, all of those sorts of things. And that really is where that technology bit comes in. Unless you want to sit around doing the same calculation with a different birthday or a different amount of income time after time after time after time, you need something that can do those kind of wide ranges of options more or less automatically. But even that takes time, and the problem, I think, for pensions is there are a lot of people, probably many on this call, who like talking to people who've got huge amounts of pension savings. There are probably very few people on this call who are willing to spend a lot of time with somebody who's got a pot of £10,000. How do you get around that? I suppose the answer again is technology, but then it has to be more self-driven than advisor-driven.
That's a very good comment, Gareth. And I would say, with technology, the first step is to replicate what the advisor do today, to automate it, And then someone going to get the idea, maybe we shouldn't just replicate what was doing in the past. Let's see what we can use the technology to find a new process. And that's when it's probably taking off. I'm going to rant on a bit about my couple of friends up in Sweden. They basically have a little bit of a startup, and their idea was they can't collect data from all the pension providers because you have a technical and legal infrastructure in Sweden, so you can do it quite easily. And what they did, they collected all information, how you package it, and could play it back to the member. So based on these contracts, you're going to have this kind of retirement cash flow. And do you like it or not? So that was a way to actually sort of engage members. And they realized, yes, people get engaged, it's really attractive, but no one's willing to pay for it. So it is a bit of a challenge to develop these products because people are not really willing to pay for it. I think that is a challenge. So you probably need to bake it into a product somewhere, but then make sure that it's kind of fair advice rather than sales. Simon.
Yeah, well, I suppose we have something like that in the UK. I mean, this is getting outside the area I usually work in, but I think it's called Pensions Wise. So that's obviously it's provided by government to give impartial advice. I think a lot of people don't use it. Maybe that is the thing to build on to make it so it is more useful. It's kind of seen as an essential thing for people to go to when they're starting to think about their retirement.
Bobby?
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity here for the government to get involved with the dashboard. The real opportunity to really get people saying, look, this is you know what all your pensions are, but do you know what your options are? Do you know what you're going to do when you retire? Are you going to retire? Have you got enough money to retire? I think the problem in the UK is the state pension isn't enough for people to retire on. There's a significant number of people on the state pension, if they try to live off it, that are below the poverty line. So yeah, I think it'd be a shame if we didn't use this dashboard to really get the awareness of pensions out there into the UK population, and people really to be a subject of conversation when people are in the 20s and 30s as well. And if we get the message across that if you invest money when you're 20, you get a lot more return on it than you invest it when you're 30, then you could get a lot more people interested in starting to put money into the pension rather than into other things.
Billy, you have raised your hand and have a question. You're on mute, by the way, so you're saying a lot of clever stuff, but we don't hear you.
Yeah, so we seem to be making, sort of really sort of hard work of this, and I sort of think sort of my words of wisdom on this is that if you start thinking about this as what I call a logical decision-making process, and it doesn't matter whether you've got a small amount of money. And by the way, Gareth, I'm one of those people that will talk to people. It doesn't matter whether you've got a small amount of money, a middle size, or a big size. Underneath it, the process is quite similar, believe it or not. And I think the thing that makes it work for me is when you turn around to people and say, what's your plan? Have you got a retirement plan? So if you've got a small amount of money, the plan might be, as you've said, Stefan, actually, money has a utility value. Give me the cash when I need it. If you've got a lot of money, the plan might be, a sustainable income. But it does seem to me, to go back to my previous point, that, we're talking about defaults, explaining options. But before we do that there's a lot of work to be done to help people understand what the key issues are, what the basics are, and the most important thing is to have a plan, and the plan doesn't have to be a complicated cash flow. It can be as simple as, what does retirement look like for you when you're 60, when you're 65, when you're 70, when you're 75. And at least if you can get people to think about what they want to do with their money, then you can go back and then start talking, about options. But it all comes back to, this sort of guidance. And I'm a bit outspoken. The problem with pension wise is that it doesn't give people what they want. And what people want is they want to know what they should do. And this is where this boundary between guidance and advice, is so difficult. And, as an advisor, I would say that, it shouldn't be beyond the wit of us all to come up with a process where most people can get, some sort of advice, even if it is simplified, focus advice.
One reflection on that, one of my first episodes of Pioneering Pension was with Brynnick van Wyk from Q Super and how they set up their product. So they had a drawdown product, which was the main product. Then they added what you would call a sort of version of collective DC. It's longevity pooling, but on a DC account. And the interesting part there is like he thought of it like, yeah, but people just want to pick between 3 products and that's fine. I mean, they didn't want more. So they say, I want a bit of that, I want a bit of that, and I'm fine. So that was his attitude towards the choice. So he also almost took it to the other extreme, saying, well, they come in there and say, what are the different alternatives? And you pick and mix, and then off you go. What is your thinking about that, Simon and Bobby? Because he's taking it a step further in sort of saying, well, it doesn't have, let's simplify it in absurdum. Is that the right thing to do?
It shows how complicated it is because sorry, should I,
go ahead, Simon, and then Bobby.
My point's probably quite brief. It depends. It shows how complicated this is because, as you say, people can pick and mix. They might want part of their pot in drawdown, part in collective DC, part as tax-free cash, whatever. So it's impossible to take. I think to kind of to get to the crux of what's really best for them. Just through a robo tool. I think it's such a nuanced, subtle area. You would need to have some kind of engagement.
What if it's good enough? I mean, it doesn't have to be the best, but is it like good enough as the satisfying condition rather than optimizing?
Yeah, I agree. We live in an imperfect world. That whatever we do, it's not going to be perfect. I think at the moment, as an industry, we're a long way from perfect. We can certainly get better and maybe find something that is good enough. And I agree with you. The way QSuper have done it is an interesting case study. I mean, they've got they've had DC savings in Australia for a lot longer than we've had in the UK as a primary form of pension provision. So we should carry on watching developments there and kind of learn from their approach. Sorry, Bobby.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, one thing is the communication point and the options and getting members discussing the options. But the other point where pooling comes in is that if they went through that and wanted bit and bit and bit, we haven't got the scale for the people with the small pots to go to some of these other options, and that's where pooling comes in. It gives us scale, and that's where pooling might just be something that we get from Master Trust when they've got the scale. We can start to look at what options can we generally offer to members, and it might not. Default might be the wrong word. It might be just the fact that we can pool stuff so that members do have options and they don't just have an annuity or take the cash. Or because income, if they want some sort of income drawdown, they just need a lot more money than the small pot to do that.
Yeah, I think what Gareth said, if your pot is too small, it's probably better to do a drawdown than taking a lifelong income, because you're not going to get enough size of your lifelong income. Looking at some comments here in the chat, and someone actually said, and it's Chris, it says pension freedom in the UK should have been called pension flexibility. We might then have had more balanced debate on how to spend the pension savings. I think it's a brilliant comment because it's all in the framing. How do you frame stuff depends how people are going to make decisions. And yeah, Any reflection on that, Simon or Bobby?
I agree. I think pension freedom was quite a misleading term, which ignored kind of, if you we kind of took to kind of list the 5 main things people want from pensions. Kind of one of them is freedom or flexibility, but there are other things too, and that those things were ignored at the time. So I agree. It was a misleading term. Of calling it flexibilities would have been better, but also there should have been work at the time to also talk about the other things that many people might desire from their pensions.
Yeah, I'm not the things that we're talked about that you might desire from your pensions. I think that was an example of poor communication.
There was also a question very early on, which I thought was a good one. It was basically, what are the benefits of mortality pooling when comparing annuity to a drawdown? So it's called a mortality drag. And the person says, I suspect the benefits from pooling is reducing the more enhanced annuities are written and the annuity pooling is reduced. But I thought, like, when you're thinking about pooling, what is sort of the benefits in terms of, if you were to summarize it very, very quickly, how would you explain that to a normal person, not an expert in this call?
So I'd say, and I think it's easier to do it by comparing it with drawdown. So you say, if you explain the benefits of pooling longevity only, you'd say, well, you could invest in drawdown. You can invest your money the same way as in the pooling vehicle, but if you did that, you got half. If you have, well, if everybody did that, half of them would run out of money. If they were also drawing down at the same pace as the pooled vehicle, and half of them would kind of die with excess money left over. So the benefits of pooling are that avoid that half a chance of running out of money at that pace.
Yeah, I'd say it's insurance, and I'd compare it to car insurance. You take out car insurance because if you crash, then the multiple hundreds of £1,000s claim will be paid, but you've paid your car insurance. You didn't need it. And mortality pooling's the same. It's insurance. It's giving everybody the same outcome basically, but whether they suffer their retirement or not. The more you look at people's individual circumstances on mortality and ask them to look at what's appropriate for their health, the least effective pooling is then, because you're basically selecting against the pooling vehicle. For pooling to work properly, everybody needs to be in it together and not start looking at their individual circumstances. Obviously, if you've got a long life, it's going to cost you a lot more to take out an annuity. If you know you're in really poor health, you wouldn't want to pool your mortality because you want to have the assets available for yourself or for your family.
Thank you. With that, I think we're running out of time. We're close to half. So I would thank everyone who's been in this call. And thank you for all your questions in the chat. I was a bit poor. I'm actually bringing them in. I'm sorry for that. And thank you for everybody who asked our questions. And big thank you, Steve, for hosting it. And a big thank particularly to Bob and Simon to discuss all these complicated and important questions. My takeaway from this was that if you're going to have a default in the DC, it should be like stay invested in a sort of portfolio until you tell us what to do with it. But once you tell us what to do with it, we need to have a clear path that people can follow, where they basically get to make decisions that are meaningful to them. And that means not a technology path, but actually figuring out what they want. And I think what we should do as well, we need to think about, don't overcomplicate it, because I think as experts, we have a tendency to do that. So perhaps where can we cut the corner to make it easier? That would be my sort of takeaway from this. So thank everyone. And Steve, perhaps you want to do the final closing?
Yes, thanks to you, Stefan, for chairing that, and thanks to Simon and Bobby. Really appreciate everybody's input. Lots of chat and lots of questions, and it's a debate that I think we need to continue the theme and get this right. So thank you very much indeed for your input and everybody's attendance. Strangely enough, next week we've got Steve Taylor from LCP talking about CDC. So there's quite a lot of chatter on the chat about CDC. I know you didn't want to talk about CDC, Stefan, today, but CDC's next week. So if you can join us next week for CDC and what LCP's view of CDC and the future of CDC, that could spin nicely into what we've discussed today. And so your contributions would be great. So. And
I think Seaman know one or two about CDC.
Well, there you go. He will. Yeah, there you go. So, but thanks for listening. Thanks for joining the Pension Playpen. If you're not a member, please join. If you are a member, please promote Playpen to others. The more the merrier. And I think these debates and these topics are of valuable importance to our industry to try and glue together consumers, members, and providers alike. So let's continue the theme. Let's continue to strive forward. We've got lots of digital clapping going on, Stefan. So thanks for that as well. And thanks, Simon, and thanks, Bobby, again. The video of today will be up this afternoon on our media tab. And as we usually say every week, let's pray for peace in the East. So there we go. I appreciate everybody's attendance, and thanks everybody for your comments and your input. So greatly received. I think this can go on and on, but we have got a hard stop, I guess, Stefan. So brilliant stuff. And Stefan, do you want to stay on for a little while? And Simon, do you want to stay on? That'd be great. And Bobby, stay on just for a quick chat afterwards.
Yep.
Be perfect. Okay. Thanks everyone. Cheers, Gareth. Thanks very much. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. That was an excellent session. Really good. Really good.
Thank
really
you.
Enjoyed it, and lots of engagement and lots of emotion, lots of passion. You know, as we said at the very beginning in our preamble, we're not going to get it right for everybody, and you know, some people want to run away from it, and some people want to. So it's a very interesting debate. Let me put it that way. So, Stefan, what did you? We usually do a little 1-minute summary after the event, and Simon will come to you as well. What did you think that today was about, and what was the biggest sort of takeaway? I guess Stefan, you first, maybe, and.
But you want to record it? You're gonna write it up?
I'm recording. Yeah, we can put something on LinkedIn at a later time. You know. So,
yeah. Well, my biggest takeaway from today is that when you're thinking about the retirement, there's not clear what the default should be. And if the member doesn't tell what they want, we should do what's sort of the best no regret choice, and that is let them stay invested in a decent return seeking portfolio until they come and tell what they want to do with the money. Because after all, if you're not using the money, you should actually take some investment risk in order to get your affordable pension. And once people do communicate with a pension provider, I think the biggest challenge we have is to make a very understandable user experience where we ask the right question to guide the people towards a solution that is sufficiently good for them. It doesn't have to be optimal. It just have to work for their needs. And I think that's how we buy most of the stuff in our lives. They should work for pension too. So my big takeaway is don't overcomplicate things.
Totally agree. So would you be, if you were a trustee, would you be putting in a default following today's conversation? Yes or no?
You're asking me?
Yes.
I thought you were bringing this towards Bobby because he was he's the trustee among us.
Bobby's a trustee, yeah, Bobby. You are a trustee, so it's an unfair question to Stefan. Bobby, if you're a trustee, would you do a default or not a default based on today?
I think Stefan's summary at the end was spot on. I think we need to have some way of keeping the members' money invested and really put the effort into communication. And get people discussing their pensions well in advance of taking their pensions. So I don't think a default as such, but this staying invested could be a default. So default is just a way to say what most people do. So if it was staying invested, I could see a scenario where that was the default of a master trust. So a master trust just keeps the money invested invest the money when you first start investing it, and it just keeps it invested until a point in time when you decide you want to do something else with that money, and that could be a default. Yeah. So I don't think it's a yes or no to a default, but I think we've come to a reasonable conclusion that if you can keep the money invested, that probably is the best outcome until members make a good decision.
So that inspires a new that could inspire a new conversation, which is, should master trusts have different defaults for accumulation and decumulation? That's another series all in itself, isn't it? But,
yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting concept.
But Steve, the answer would be like you do have a sort of default which goes towards a landing portfolio, and that just linger along. So you probably have one sort of investment strategy that you follow as long as someone tells us something else, both for the savings and the retirement phase. I don't think you need to invent something. You just need to extend what's already there.
Okay, I understand. Simon, what's your final takeaway, would you say?
This is one of the great areas that we need to work on as an industry. I think we haven't cracked. We're a long way off cracking this one. So in terms of how do you help guide people to decide what to do at the point of retirement? People with DC savings, and it's absolutely right that we're discussing it as an industry, and there are lots of great comments in this debate, and we need to have further conversations about it.
I totally agree. So yeah, I think we'll monitor it, and we'll see what the feedback is, and I think more to come in this space. We need to do a lot more. And rightfully listen to consumers and keep it simple, Stefan, as you said earlier. Keep it simple. So that's great. Okay.
Peace. Keep it simple, Stefan. Yeah.
Keep it simple, Stefan. There we go. Yeah, perfect. But thank you very much for your input. Thanks for the panel and the comments you made today. Great session, and I'm sure we'll do it again. Let me put it that way. It's going to roll on and rumble on, so, which is great. So fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your day. And
thank you, Steve.
And we'll we'll post the video up later on.
If I can get signal over in Cyprus, I might join next week.
You're in Cyprus, Bobby. Oh, have a nice time. Well deserved break, I guess. So
yeah, I'm going on there Thursday morning. Yeah.
Fantastic. Have a great time. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks for your time. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.